of you who model are going to be involved in weathering of some sort. No doubt, especially military modeling, you're going to want to weather your model. I think what's important with respect to weathering is that it adds context to the model. It connects your model to the earth, even aircraft. It makes the model come alive in a real sense, and in my opinion, it's the one part of a bill that really allows you to be the most artistic. Let's admit that when we're building a model, we're following instructions. We're for the most part putting together pieces of plastic that were part of the kit, decaling, all of that. You're not as much being artistic as you are just following instructions. Now there's a skill level involved in that, obviously, but it's only when you get to weathering that you're actually going to be able to be a little creative, to be artistic, to really to be interpretive as you view reference photos, any number of things that may provide a resource for you and allow you to add, for instance, mud or something like that to that particular vehicle, given the theater it was operating in, the context in which it was in. So those are the kind of things that I think is pretty interesting, and you're able to be, as I say, artistic. You know, models, and I'm sure we all agree with this, go through various stages. Especially after construction, many of you are involved in what's called, with your airbrush, you would do probably like pre-shading, and then paint your model, and then there might be some post-shading involved. Probably you would add a gloss coat to receive your decals, and then after that, flatten it out again with a matte or a flat coat. But after all of that is finished, then comes the possibility and certainly the process of weathering your model. The weathering of a model can take on numerous applications as well. You may again use your airbrush to do a little dusting, especially towards the bottom part of the model. It might be to add some dirt effects, something like that. And no doubt with most of the models that we are involved in, especially military modeling, you'll have some chipping and some of these types of things that you want to accomplish with the model. All of us probably have been involved with various washes, particularly oil washes, although you can do acrylic washes. Now you can buy aftermarket products that are already mixed for you. You do the washes that way. There's various filters that you might use, dot filters and the like. But probably one of the last things you're going to do, if you're going to do it, and what seems to be increasingly more popular, is to use pigments and powders. And the operative term here is, in fact, it's one of the, if in fact not the last thing that you're going to do. Once you've applied some of the pigments and powders, that's really pretty much the final stage of your build. You may want to seal that later, but I'm not sure that that's always that helpful because it is going to dull down the color, as it might be important for you to maintain that deep red mud color or rust color or something like that. I have personally no problem in leaving some of the powder and pigment that I put on very last just to stay that way, because it is gritty, and again it connects your model to an earthy historical type context. So pigment powders are becoming very popular. I think you know that. Adding rust and dust and dirt and grime and even grease, piling on mud, whether it's going to be a wet-looking mud or a dry-looking mud. It can be very effective, of course, and it's relatively easy. And here's the best part: for the most part, it's correctable. It's not without its critics, however. I've read some articles where some of the especially amps and armor purists are suggesting guys are doing a little bit too much weathering, and the reason why is to cover up their mistakes. And my response to that is, so what? You know, it's not too unsimilar from a lot of guys adding stowage in some context to also correct a mistake. The key thing is that the final presentation is going to be accurate, and it's going to be without blemish in that regard. So I don't have a big problem with that. Now, obviously, if you're adding a lot of mud to cover up a lot of mistakes, that's not good. You want to build your model as best as you possibly can using the skills that you've developed. And after that, and you're satisfied with it, then the weathering, you're free to weather it, knowing that you're not cheating or that you're covering up mistakes. Now, I've been using pigments and powders for a number of years. I took the liberty to display some models so that you might appreciate that in the sense that while oil washes and all of that are very popular, I find that I can control my weathering with powders and pigments more effectively than with either oil or acrylic washes. Take into consideration, I don't know, Michael, if you want to zoom in on that, just this little U-boat, whether you think it's weathered appropriately or not, at least I would make the point that everything you see on that model is weathered with powder, not with oil washes. And yet, would you not agree, when you look at it at face value, you might think there's some washing that has gone on there to create the rusting and the water stains and all of this. But I did all of that with powder. I didn't use any oil wash or acrylic wash on that at all. And I just completed this Saint Chamon. Again, there are some washes on that before the pigments and powders, but then everything you see, particularly as a top coat, would be powders. We need to think about what pigments and powders are. There's also a rather lively debate on the internet as to whether is there a real difference between pigments and powders. And then you may even bring into that the idea of pastel chalks as well. I think technically there is a slight difference between pigments and powders. Pigments seem to be more refined, and powders just more basic and more crude. But I think you probably know that what we're talking about are the natural elements that essentially will, once a binder or some kind of thinner is added to it, produces the paints that you use. So it's dried paint, essentially, is what we're talking about with pigments and powders. And to make paint from those raw ingredients, you have to add what is it called, a glutenate, and then you're able to create paints. Industrial weathering pigments and some powders have poly binders, adhesives that are part of the powders, and that's helpful because when you put it on your model, obviously it's just not going to dust off or fall off. It's going to be able to stick to that surface. Assuming, and this is an important point, that you're applying it over a flat coat. You don't want to put powders and pigments over a gloss coat. The gloss coat you're going to put on your model to receive your decals, as most of us know, and then after that, for the most part, unless you guys that are doing automotive models and you've got these great-looking, shiny vehicles, you're probably not going to be all that interested in what I'm talking about tonight. Having said that, if you're doing a model that is going to be weathered with pigments and powders, you want to get it to a point where it's matte coat, flat coat, and then that's what's going to receive your powders and your pigments much, much better. The interesting thing about what's available on the market today is that there are all kinds of possibilities. I think most of you guys have probably seen this. How many of you use various pigments and powders that are out there? You know that AK has a line of pigments and powders, and of course MIG has powders, and then there's a new company called, a relatively new company, Secret Weapon, and they have powders. And Nat was talking to me, he's got a thing of pastel chalks he's had for like 20 years. And so you can scrape down some pastel chalk as well and make a little bit of powder. However, I would suggest to you that you're not going to get the kind of self-adhesive binder with the pastel chalk that you're going to get with some of the products that are made over the counter. How many of you know that Tamiya, of course, makes a whole line of pigments and powders, and then you can get makeup. But I would recommend before you go and raid your wife's makeup chest, you get permission. But isn't that interesting? I wonder where Tamiya got the idea. And you know, you got to be careful if you're going to cut cost and go with just some cheap makeup. Some of them have some bling in them. They have a little bit of sparkle in them, so you don't want that. Some of them are flat, but what I thought was interesting is here is a Tamiya kit, and there's your typical female makeup kit. I felt really odd in the drugstore, standing in the aisle trying to find one of these. All these women were looking at me like I was nuts.
You got some great stuff on you. Don't feel bad.
They were just jealous.
But the same, look at the same applicator and everything. So pretty cool stuff. A couple of weeks ago, I made an interesting discovery. I was going through an old toolbox I had from when I lived in Phoenix. I hadn't even opened. I mean, it's just a really old, rusty toolbox, and I had this in there. How many of you know what this is? Old marking. Yeah, old marking chalk for the construction guys. You know, they put it in a canister, they pull that line out, and then the one guy snaps it down. And this, you can get it in white or you can get it in pink, and this is pink. And I want you to know, it is the absolute best-looking rust powder, and because it's a marking chalk, it has a self-adhesiveness to it. And I actually did a little experiment. Maybe you can see. I went ahead and recoated the muffler on this Mark V, and it's a great little deal. As a matter of fact, when I finish, I have so much. This will last till Jesus comes. So I put a little bit in little tins, and I didn't know how many would be here tonight. But you can take one of these home tonight if you want your little starter kit of rust powder.
Does he build models also?
Pardon?
Does he build models also?
Jesus. He was a carpenter.
Yeah.
He built something.
I also have an article that I can pass out to you. You might want to pass this around as well. This is by John Robinson of AMPS of Central Virginia, called Weathering with Pigments. So, William, go ahead and pass that around. And he makes some good points, and I just wanted to point them out to you real quick before I demonstrate a couple things. As you're getting this sheet, you'll see it, but I'm going to read it now so we can capitalize on the time. He talks about advantages and disadvantages to using powders and pigments, and he says, with respect to advantages, that they look and act like scaled dirt and dust. So that's very desirable when obviously you're weathering an armor model, a military model for the most part, or farm, trucks, stuff like that. It brings texture to the model surface, which paint cannot do. The application methods vary. It can be used either wet or dry. The interesting thing about these little containers of pigments is they'll last forever. How many of you have gone to a bottle of paint that you hadn't opened up in a while, and you open it up and it's like no saving it, so you just throw it away? You'll never have to throw away pigments and powders. They last virtually forever. They are naturally matte and flat, unless, of course, you introduce a gloss agent. And here's what's important. They are reversible if the effect that you want was not created and you want to kind of start over. Now, there's a caveat to that. They're basically reversible, and I'll show you that in a moment, too. The disadvantages are perhaps durability. They don't withstand handling. But most of us, when we complete a model, we're not putting a lot of hands on it at that point anyway. Sealing them may be something that you want to do, but don't forget when you seal, You do a final seal coat, you're going to lessen the color effect as well, so you want to take that in consideration. And then, although I don't think that's the case now, when he wrote this article, he said there may not be a lot of custom colors available. And the fact remains, you can mix these so you can come up with the color you want. Not to mention the fact that Mig Jimenez and these guys are going crazy with this stuff, and there's pretty much any color of pigment or powder, in my opinion, that you probably would want. So that's a pretty good article as well. Then, not only are these particular ones that I brought here tonight available, go online, go to your military or your hobby shops. You have all kinds of companies that are offering powders and pigments now. AK, there's one called Agama Patinator, reference to the word patina. Patina is a covering on something that gives it a kind of a finish. Bragdon Enterprises, CMK, Dr. Benz. The one that I use a lot is Doc O'Brien's, and you can get that. Who was just telling me a Micromark? I think. Yeah. So I've been using Doc O'Brien's powders for years, and they have a self-adhesive in them, so they're really good as well. Anyway, I've got a bunch of stuff up here. Vallejo has just come out with a whole line of pigments and powders. You're going to see a lot of this in our hobby stores. And again, if you don't want to spend the money on some of the marketed name brand powders, again, you can go the route of pastel chalks and scrape down a little bit yourself. Find yourself an old bottle of marking chalk, raid your wife's makeup case and get her CoverGirl. Don't tell her. And you'll be able to pretty much, what I find with the makeup, but it would be replicated in like Tamiya, is that they become this is a little bit more pasty, a little bit more gummy, a little bit more slick than just the powders, and I like just the powders. So, by the way, the other thing that you want to do too, that I would include in this, is your graphite. Shave down your pencil or use a pencil sharpener and use that graphite. Graphite can be very effective for gun barrels and tank tracks. I have an old gun barrel here. The thing with graphite, by the way, you can use a brush, but I actually think your finger is just the best thing to do because it's soft and it conforms to the complex curves and edges of your model, and it adds that nice kind of gun barrel effect that you might want. And so just use your finger. How's that? Can you see it? Can't see it.
There we go. There you go. Yeah. How about that? There you go.
I didn't do it real, but again, you could use a cotton Q-tip or you can use a brush, but I just like my finger because, like I said, your finger is soft. You're not putting fingerprints on there. You're just wiping it around, and that graphite will give you a really nice look. One of the things about powders that I find intriguing, as I mentioned a moment ago, is you can use them dry or wet. A lot of times I just like to brush them on dry, and you start slow, start low, and then you can build it up. Just like you can see on some of these models. All this streaking that was done, look at the Tiger tank, all that streaking, there is some wash that was used there, but a lot of that streaking, even to replicate the rain streaking, that was all done with powder. That was all done with pigments. I think what's interesting about these is that you can do different things. You can get a little bit of white glue, especially in some of your armor models, and lay down some white glue and then pack in some of the powder and create a little bit more of a mud effect, a little bit of a thicker effect and mud effect. You can load up a brush with the powder and take your clean airbrush and hold it a few inches away from your model or the area that you want to splatter, and then just under low pressure, just hit your airbrush a little bit. It hits that loaded brush and it splatters in a random pattern. The powder, whatever earthy looking, earth tone powder that, or pigment that you want to apply to that particular model. If we're going to demonstrate something, I thought what I would do, just to show you how some of this can work, is I just finished this 6-pounder for review for IPMS USA, and I purposely left the left wheel a little bit less weathered than I wanted to, so I'm not sure if you're going to be able to zoom in on that, Michael. But what we're going to do with that, is that okay?
I gotta hold the camera here.
Got to hold the camera steady.
Yeah. 1 second. Yeah. Definitely some spots of edit. Okay. Go for it.
You are able to, if you're going to apply your powders wet, use what's called a fixer. AK markets their own fixer, and I was at Brooker's Hobby the other day, and Ludwig was talking to me about Humbrol decal fix, which they're now suggesting can be used with pigments. I tried it. If you want my recommendation, use it for decals. Don't use it for pigments. I didn't like it at all. You can use mineral spirits. I didn't like that as well because it doesn't dry. What I found the best was the AK fixer or just plain alcohol. And in fact, to my taste, the alcohol was the best. What happened? Oh. Not that kind of alcohol. That was
Okay, all right.
91%. Boy, you guys are horrible. Anyway, just a nice little tube of alcohol there, 91%. It dries very quickly, and that's real desirable, as you're going to see here in a minute.
Where can you get it? Because I only find 70.
91%? You can't find 91%?
No, I only find 70%. Where do you find the 91?
Just a bottle of alcohol.
Go to Rite Aid, you have it.
Yeah,
Also, Home Depot, they
Yeah.
sell that chicken. Yeah.
just a bottle of alcohol. But
One's a lot more expensive than the 70-some, but it'd be a couple bucks for a bottle instead of 98 cents.
I put it in this little thing because it's a bottle, and so that's kind of nice too. But what I want to demonstrate real quick, and then I'll be done because I know our time is limited. What I'm going to do, the right side wheel, with a tire like that, of course, it's desirable unless you're going to make it a real muddy scene, and of course my base is not mud, so it's not going to show that, but it's got to show some dirt. It's got to show some dirt in the tread and in the grooves of the tire. These were really nice tires. This is a rich kit, 1/35 scale. They were molded in black. Really nice detail on the tires. So what I'm going to do is load it up first with a little bit of alcohol. Are you able to get that, Michael?
Yep.
Okay, I'm just putting alcohol on it and then a little bit on the side. I'm going to use the MIG dry mud, and then we're going to just take some of the powder and just start laying it right on there. Don't worry about it if it's getting all over the place. It's going to go down in the grass, or if you, obviously I wouldn't be doing this on the base. I would have done it before I put it on the base. But I needed to get this done and send it in to IPMS USA. So, can you all see that?
Yes.
So I'm just loading up the brush with it, trying to get it into the grooves of the tire. You could do this one of two ways. You can put the alcohol on first and then put the powder on, or just put the powder on and then you touch it with the alcohol, and the alcohol doesn't disturb it, it just kind of saturates it, and then it dries. Now, With a tire, of course, you don't want it covered with the mud, and so what you could do is either take your finger or just an eraser, and I should let this dry, but for time's sake, I'm not doing it. And then come back over the top so that I'm going to move it here.
Is that color just like an earth color?
Yeah, it's just a very earthy color, just a beige color. The lighting is really not so good right here. If you could get, I'm not sure if you can get a close-up of it, but all it's doing is it's just adding a little bit of extra detail and depth to the tire, showing the tire tracks that have some,
Oops, sorry.
some earth
Sorry about
caught
that.
in there.
Yeah.
But where the tire is going to run, that's going to be black. So you just want to take your finger and hit the high points, and it'll come down. I'm sorry it's not looking real good right there, but
You're making the point.
one thing that I want to show you is how you can do panel lines. I know a lot of you guys spend time with pre-shading. How much time we got? We're pretty much done here? Okay. Let me just do this real quick and we'll be done. I made the comment about you can correct. So here we have, can you get that, Michael?
Yep.
I put this together and put some sky gray on it. But you could, you can see that right there. Can you see the panel lines that have been weathered a little bit? That's all done with just black powder. Now, you might want to mask that off and do it with airbrushing, and that's fine. I have no issues with that. But a lot of my biplanes, what I do is I detail around the edges of the rudder and all of that with powder rather than with oil washes. I don't like oil washes. Sometimes they're hard to control. They stain it. And yet I can take a little black powder and just very lightly go over my panel lines. You say, well, that's a little bit too thick. Well, I agree. The neat thing about powders is a simple, soft eraser. And I can come back down and lessen that line a little bit. Try doing that with paint. And then brush it off. Okay, can you see that? I mean, at least you can appreciate that there's been a little bit of a effect created, a weathering effect created with again, just using powder. And if you make a mistake, if I made a mistake like that, the powder eraser is just going to take it off. Again, try doing that after you've painted something. You're going to have to sand it down or somehow
Don't be a
get
snob.
rid of that paint. But your weathering powder, and by the way, that would also be true with if you've put some wet on there, you can still do the same thing. So I might. I'm just using this model as a for instance. Just put a bunch of, like if that was a vehicle. So I got a bunch of loose powder on there. And then watch this. You see that? It's not disturbing at all. You see how it's diffusing? That's the alcohol. And the alcohol will dry pretty quickly and then leave me a nice, it'll maintain the original color of the powder. And it'll be binded. And it will be adhered to the vehicle, the undercarriage of, not a wing obviously, but an undercarriage, side carriage, running gear, whatever. And yet, I can't do it now because it's still wet, but if I made a mistake, I'd still be able to remove it.
Cool.
You're not going to do that with paint. So give pigments a try, give powders a try. You'll be surprised at some of the things you can accomplish. Take some old parts and old kits, do your tracks, take some old parts, practice with it. I use this, I practice, try and get different effects, so I can determine, you know, what's happening with these powders. And then start weathering your models, and it really connects it to the earth, I think, so.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I have a gift for everybody.